Hello everyone, in this video I would like to briefly discuss one of the most, if not the most pressing issue that we all face in this current moment in time, and that is the intricacies of the relationship between the two great powers that is the United States of America and the People's Republic of China, and how these relations have deteriorated over the years, and the current development that we've been getting as of late, and how it pretty much affects us all. But specifically, what I want to discuss in this video is the United States behavior as it pertains to trying to disarm, to slow down, to stop China's ascent, because in the eyes of many, and rightfully so, China is indeed on the ascent, and it is the U.S. empire that is the falling empire, with the Chinese empire being the rising one, as it was with the U.S. and the British however many years ago. But what I want to do firstly is show you a video. This is Mr. Kevin Rudd basically giving us a rundown. He has very good insight on U.S.-China policy, and he's telling us about how the U.S. has tried to convince other countries for some time now to join them in their tech sanctions. That word sanction comes up again. It's been very prevalent in our vocabulary as of late, and we'll continue to see it. But he talks about these tech sanctions that the U.S. has been putting against China, that they've been failing to get other countries to copy. Take a look.
Exports. Ian's exactly right. The administration worked on this for 6 to 12 months, trying to get the allies on board. Didn't work entirely well, because none of them did. So they've done it unilaterally in the expectation they can leverage the allies on board from this point on. It'll be a work in progress. Obviously, the case study is what happened with 5G. But 5G is a vastly different kettle of fish than this one, because it's about actually denying technology imports now in the real world, not what infrastructure you build for advanced telecommunications. So this is still a story which will unfold. Why have they done it now? I think they reached a strategic conclusion that China was progressively narrowing the gap in semiconductors in particular, and the other 5 to 10 technology categories they analysed most carefully, and concluded that a strategic action was necessary. I think when the history is written of this period, the decision by the administration on the 7th of October to ban high technology exports to China
Tipping point.
is a tipping point.
Yeah, great.
It is a central development which we will look back on in the evolution of not just technological decoupling, but wider economic decoupling.
I think the Schultz speech after the Russian invasion was a turning point for NATO and for Europe and the end of the peace dividend. And I agree completely with Kevin that the U.S. decision is a turning point in the U.S.-China relationship. I would remind us that when Biden first announced he was running for the presidency, he disparaged China as irrelevant and having no technological capabilities compared to the Americans. And everyone was stunned, saying, well, how could Biden possibly believe that? And I think that over the course of the last couple of years, he has absolutely gotten educated on the fact that what the China he used to know has actually caught up with the Americans in all sorts of core technologies and is actually ahead of the Americans in some that matter.
So as you saw there, Mr. Kevin Rudd basically detailed for us how U.S. policy has not, of course to the chagrin of the U.S., been adopted by other countries, even U.S. allies. So they've been trying to persuade their allies and the countries that align with them, at least ideologically, to get on this crusade against the People's Republic of China, because they don't want to see them basically do well. This is a country that has not submitted their subservience to the U.S. empire, and they've decided to go their own way, and they're doing well. And of course, we can't have that. We need to have you submit and to adopt the ideology of austerity and neoliberalism that the U.S. has to promote. And of course, if you don't want to do that, well, we'll fight you, of course, through military means. We'll get into that in just a second. But we'll do so at least most immediately through the use of sanctions, and these tech sanctions, as Mr. Rudd outlined there, that decision on October the 7th to uh, get rid of or stop exporting high technologies into China, and how him and Mr. Ian detailed how that, looking back in history years from today, will indeed be looked at as a tipping point in U.S.-China relations. But in combination with this video that I just had you look at, I want to show you another one, because this one, because the previous one that we just watched shows, gives us a little insight into how the U.S.'s plans have been failing and how nobody has wanted to go along with their policy as it pertains to weakening China and trying to slow their progression for many different reasons. I'm sure each particular country has their own reasons. But this is a video. This is from Mr. Evan Feinbaum, formerly Deputy Assistant Secretary of State and the VP of major Washington think tank Carnegie Endowment. He's talking about how the U.S. has been ramping up their coercive measures as it pertains to getting countries to follow along with their policy.
And I will tell you, the United States is increasingly extraterritorializing the application of these instruments precisely because it is not the trajectory of everybody else's policy. If it was, ideally what the United States would want to see is other countries deploying export controls and administrative and regulatory instruments in an identical way vis-a-vis China as a trading partner, as a capital partner in or out, and particularly in the technology and data space. Because that's not happening, the United States is attempting to elicit voluntary compliance, and if it cannot, I confidently predict to you the United States is going to bring the hammer down, and try to coerce compliance on a lot of these controls. And it reflects this American zeitgeist on competition with China, which, by the way, is mirrored in some respects on the Chinese side. And the Chinese have built their own architecture to use administrative and regulatory instruments and are trying to offshore it in the same way. But it will catch other countries not called the United States and China betwixt and between. And so that really circles me back to where I started. So that's a collision for the United States, because if American policies and strategies for strategic competition with China are not mirrored elsewhere, we're heading for a somewhat fractious period between the United States and the very partners that it needs to navigate competition with China. So you often hear this talking point from Washington. The United States isn't forcing countries to choose. We don't want anybody to have to choose. Okay? Try putting Huawei kit in your 5G backbone and see how the United States feels about you not making a choice. Try not complying with US export controls and see whether the United States wants you to make a choice. Try making Huawei your cybersecurity partner of choice, as Indonesia has. I just published a paper on this at the Carnegie Endowment. All those political tensions between China and Indonesia, guess who's doing cybersecurity backbone solutions in Indonesia? Huawei. How does the United States feel about that? Would prefer you don't make a choice? Those contradictions are going to get sharper and sharper.
Wow, once again, very insightful. So, as he was detailing there, he said, and I quote, the U.S. is currently trying to insert what he called voluntary compliance. So what they would like to see is from other countries, without them really saying so, maybe hinting as such, is to go along with their own individual anti-China policies, with their sanctions and whatever other methods that they have to bother the Chinese. Well, that's not happening. In other countries, of course, they have their own reasons for it. We can get into it, but I don't really want to do that for the sake of this video. But, I mean, one of the reasons could be, and this is a very obvious reasons, other countries need China. The U.S., I don't want to overstate this. It definitely shouldn't be overstated. But it isn't quite what they used to be. And other countries see that the world is changing. We're entering what many would call, and can rightly call, a multipolar world, and they're seeing the shifts that's happening, and they're seeing the fact that China is a much bigger player in the world economy than they formerly were, and they're looking at it and they're weighing their options, and they're saying, well, maybe we shouldn't get too attached to the United States that's in not a very good state right now as it pertains to their economy, and maybe we should look towards the Chinese, among other things, and we don't really think it's in our best interest to go forward with this anti-China crusade simply because the U.S. wants us to. And as he said there, if they can't get voluntary, if it can't be voluntary, they'll go forward with these more adamant, coercive tactics, trying to essentially, he didn't say this, but I'll say it, bully other countries into adopting this anti-China crusade mentality where their policies are centered towards crippling the Chinese economy, blocking specific exports as it pertains to technology in this instance, but in many other instances, trying to slow their growth and stop them from doing what, of course, the United States would not want to see them do. But of course, needless to say, it has been very difficult for the United States to get that. 0 countries have signed on to this anti-China crusade, and what many fear, and rightly so they fear, is that the U.S. will go alone as a lone wolf in this anti-China crusade, and they'll try to do it all by themselves, and it won't work out well because things that take these sorts of development, especially as it pertains to economics, tend to grow and bring forth militarism, and it turns into war. Now, most recently, Biden met or had talks with Xi Jinping, and I believe he said, I'm kind of paraphrasing here, that there shouldn't be a new Cold War, but U.S. policy says quite the opposite.